What's up, everyone? I wanted to talk today about roll-ups because roll-ups are a topic that a lot of people are super interested in, and I get a lot of questions about. And if you understand them, they can be incredibly powerful and really, really interesting and can create a lot of value very quickly. Now, obviously, they have challenges and difficulties as well, but I wanted to show you the math behind a traditional roll-up. So there's some other really creative ways you can do roll-ups with things like virtual mergers and other kind of roll-up strategies that don't even require capital. But I'm going to show you just a plain vanilla roll-up merger model today that really illustrates the concept of multiple expansion and also shows you how to create millions of dollars in value from thin air, basically, overnight by merging some companies together. So this is an actual model. I've scraped some of the company data out of it from a home services roll-up that we looked at doing a couple years ago. And we had three companies. One of them, was doing about 11 million in revenue and about $1.1 million of EBITDA. Another one was doing 5 million of revenue and about $1.1 million of EBITDA, which is really interesting, right? What's driving almost double the revenue, same profitability, and obviously you can see from a margin structure standpoint, they're relatively similar. They both have about 60 to 65% cost of sales, and similar gross profit. The smaller company had slightly higher gross profit, but from an OpEx standpoint, the small company was much leaner, right? So they were operating with about 14% OpEx versus 22%, and so they were putting a lot more profit to the bottom line, which is a really interesting kind of case study in and of itself. That profit's what matters, not necessarily enterprise size or revenue. And if you can be really lean and mean, you can still make a lot of money. These companies double the size basically, and they're making as much money as their smaller competitor. And then we have company 3 here, which is doing about 4 million and change of revenue and about 600K. So they're kind of in the middle. Their cost structure is a little higher, you can see here. And so as a result of that, their margins are lower, even though they're sort of similar size. And that will impact them from a multiple standpoint, which we'll look at in a second. But anyway, I just think this is really cool. So the combined merged companies, if we merge them all together, would have about just over $20 million in revenue, about $7.4 million in gross profit. And assuming we make no adjustments to any of the shared costs, right? Assuming we're paying 3 times for insurance and we're paying rent 3 different times and all of this different stuff, no changes, the consolidated EBITDA would be just under $3 million, about $2.9 million. So that makes sense. And this is where it gets really interesting. So if you look at the purchase multiples for these businesses, right? So on average, and it depends on the industry, the scope, the size, et cetera. For these particular businesses, here's kind of the purchase multiples we were looking at, right? So this one was about a 4x, giving it about a $4.5 million purchase price. This one was just a 375. So given that it was a little bit smaller, questions around whether that enhanced margin structure is really sustainable or whether they're kind of undercosted, and to actually operate it, you might have to increase margins a little bit or decrease margins, increase expenses a little bit. Gives a slightly lower valuation, even though the EBITDA is kind of comparable. And then this one being smaller and lower margin, prices at the lowest multiple, about a 3x. So in aggregate, the total purchase price is $10.7 million, which is it's not weighted by size, but just the average multiple is about just over 3.5. So this is where it gets really interesting. If we merge these companies together, right, and now we have this $20 million revenue business doing $3 million of EBITDA, that business, because it's much larger, there's a much larger buyer pool, much more financing available, et cetera, now could price somewhere around a 6.5 multiple. We could debate whether that's high or low, but I mean, I've definitely seen home services businesses with 3 million or more of EBITDA pricing in the mid to high single digits. So I use 6.5 just kind of as a midpoint here. You could make a case maybe it's 6. You could make a case maybe it's 8. But I think 6.5 is a reasonable, somewhat conservative assessment here. So just by merging these companies together, that $10.5 million purchase price, now that it's one business, is worth about almost $19 million, which is crazy, right? So that created $8 million of value just by combining these businesses, because the bigger business trades for a higher multiple. And so because it's trading for a higher multiple, it's much more valuable, even though nothing else has really changed. Now, we could get fancy here and say, okay, hey, we're actually going to close down this office and we're going to, actually, I don't know if that's impacting both sides of the calculation. Okay, I don't think it is. Let's see, we'll close down this office and, we're going to consolidate our insurance spend a little bit. reduce that. Hey, maybe we're going to reduce operating expenses here to 500 because of some other synergies. Suddenly, with a couple synergies, we had like 200K of profit. Now we've created almost $10 million of value, right? Which is crazy. But we'll go back. We'll assume none of that stuff has been created and just say just by merging them, it creates about $8 million of value. That's unlevered, right? So that's just saying $10 million purchase price. If you paid all cash for that, you could basically resell that business for $18 million or $19 million almost as a consolidated company. Here's where it gets really crazy. If you layer in the fancy term for it is just the capital structure, which is basically just how much equity and how much debt. We're not even really going to take into account seller financing or anything like this in this structure. But just if we said, hey, a bank on average or an SBIC or a senior lender will typically go about 3 turns of senior leverage or senior loan financing on a deal. So if we got 3 turns of financing on a $2.9 million EBITDA, that's about $8.7 million of debt. And then I assumed a pretty conservative number, say, hey, we're going to put in 500K of deal expenses, additional working capital, all that stuff, which means we would need about $2.5 million of equity to do this deal, right? So the $2.5 million of equity, this is where this is the power of leverage, and this is why leverage buyouts can be so interesting. They can also be dangerous, but this is why people do them. You have $2.5 million of cash equity. You borrow $8.7 million from the bank, and now the company post the merger is worth $18 million or almost $19 million. And so you still have that $8.7 million loan. Now you've got a $19 million company. And so the difference between those two things is you have a $19 million business with an $8.7 million loan, right? If you sold it, you pay the 8.7 loan off. And now you have over $10 million, which just on the equity value created, you put in $2.5 million. Now it's worth 10, and the value differential is $7.6 million of additional equity value that's been created. And the total equity multiple expansion is about 4 times. So you put in $2.5 million, basically the day you merge it, assuming you're trading at a 6.5 multiple, it's now worth about 10 million. So that's 4xing your money just by putting it into a roll-up. The math is pretty insane. This is not even getting into earnouts, seller financing, more creative structures, anything like that. I just wanted to show you the math of why roll-ups can be so interesting. To me, it's fascinating. It's a really compelling business model, and it's something you should definitely be looking at if you're not thinking about it.